Gentlemen, thank you all very much for sacrificing a bit of your fetting and carnival observations to come for what I hope would be a very brief press conference, having returned from the CARICOM Heads of Government Inter-sessional Meeting held in Basseterre, St Kitts and Nevis. We traveled on Monday, and all of Tuesday and all of Wednesday we were focused on quite a tight agenda, and I can report that we did get some things done. So it was stressful but worth the while. Firstly, I want to indicate that by now the full communique of CARICOM would have been published on the website, because by now, so what I would mention here, if you check the CARICOM site, you would see the details and the specific wording of the instances. So I'm just going to mention the things that took our attention. One of the main things that we addressed was the question of regional transportation, where the Multilateral Air Services Agreement was in gestation for quite some time. This is an agreement which brings into being, with the signature of Trinidad and Tobago, makes 9 countries now signing on to it, and it is now provisionally available for operations. It brings into being a single airspace in the Caribbean, with all the benefits that that would bring to the people of the region. And this is to be seen in the context of our drive towards the single market and economy, where transportation in all its forms is an integral part of the operationalization and realization of the benefits of a single market. It means that instead of having individual jurisdictions for each territory, like Grenada has its airspace, Barbados has its, and each one requires a certain amount of legal framework and documentation for the airlines to operate. Now with a single services agreement, with that agreement, it makes it the airspace available without those strictures. So Caribbean Airlines can now, speaking here from Trinidad and Tobago's perspective, of course, Caribbean Airlines can now, without fetter, plan its business without the multitude of barriers that exist when you don't have that kind of airspace arrangement. And a second thing that attracted the attention of the heads that, as we dealt with the whole question of regional transport, is LIAT. And I don't want to scare you, because you may recall that Trinidad and Tobago used to be a major shareholder in LIAT, and we, for years, had provided support, which one may call subsidy to LIAT. But eventually, Trinidad and Tobago got out of LIAT. And I was reminded at this meeting that we still have a minuscule shareholding in LIAT, but 1%. But we do not acknowledge that is in any operational way, because it is not the intention of Trinidad and Tobago to get involved in any ownership or subsidy arrangement with LIAT. However, the heads of government were informed that LIAT is in serious financial difficulty, needing, within a matter of a fortnight, an injection of minimum $5 million US in order to keep flying. Now, if LIAT ceases to fly, I need not tell you the economic and other impact that that would have on the region. While Trinidad and Tobago does not rely heavily on LIAT for transportation, the other territories are virtually at the mercy of a LIAT service. However, the discussion understood quite clearly that this is a matter for the shareholders of LIAT. So Trinidad and Tobago is not in that category. However, a decision had been taken by the shareholders of LIAT, who are largely Barbados, Dominica, Antigua, and others, St. Vincent, that they will have to act in emergency to ensure that LIAT stays flying. One of the outcomes of that decision is that currently part of LIAT's problems have to do with LIAT flying on economic routes with loads that are heavily subsidized. And if the airline is to remain flying to countries that have routes like that, the shareholders are saying that such countries will have to guarantee a minimum revenue stream to the airline, or the airline would cease to fly on those routes. As I speak to you now, I do not know what the situation is with Trinidad and Tobago, LIAT service into Trinidad and Tobago. But what it means is that if the routes coming to Trinidad and Tobago are uneconomic and the receiving country requires the service to continue, then we may or may not have to enter into an agreement, as we do with the big airlines into Tobago, where you have to pay them for beyond a certain level of seats if they don't get a certain load. But I am not sure what our situation is, but I'd be surprised if we are one of those uneconomic routes. The second thing is that in seeking to restructure LIAT's business, one of their major cost centers is the aircraft maintenance issue. And I have agreed to allow them to talk with CAL to see whether there is any economic benefit or possibilities for cooperation between CAL and LIAT from that standpoint, purely from a business operations. So CAL has been so, it has been mentioned to CAL, and we expect that CAL would. LIAT is supposed to come to talk to CAL to see whether there is any possibility of them doing business with CAL from that standpoint, which may relieve them of some of the external expenses and having those work done locally. If that is so, then we here in Trinidad and Tobago can get the benefit of providing that service towards in the area of aircraft maintenance. LIAT owes the CDB significant sums of money, which the shareholders are required now to address. So for the moment, that's where that is. The other issue on regional transportation was that we had this subcommittee headed by the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who was looking at it, and the whole question of reintroducing into the region some kind of passenger sea ferry. And we discussed it at length, and Trinidad and Tobago was able to give our experience on the cost of operating such a service, which is heavily subsidized, because they were talking about a fast ferry service. We indicate to them that a fast ferry service is expensive, and without significant government subsidy, it may not be something that one can look to. However, a ferry service of a different nature might be possible. And we also discussed the possibility of looking for external support in acquiring the infrastructure, and government giving the private sector various incentives and of one kind or another, so as to see whether that will encourage the private sector to see business opportunity in there. So we are still looking at the possibility of some kind of inter-island ferry service, especially since air service is becoming so troublesome, and in some areas of our region, the sea ferry might be some element of substitute along the way. So that is one area that took up a lot of our time. The other area is the area of the CSME itself, where, as we had this special meeting in Trinidad and Tobago, where we agreed to, the whole body of countries signed on to the idea of operationalizing the CSME and adding to the number of categories of persons who could travel without hindrance as we move towards freedom of free movement in the region. But then we came upon a situation where Antigua, Barbuda, and St Kitts and Nevis pointed out that they had been operating this system before, even without the agreement that we had put in place here in Port of Spain, to the extent that they now have local issues which caused them to ask for a deferral of the requirement of that for 5 years, so as to treat with their local issues. And that was agreed to at the heads, given the peculiar nature of the problem. We also had a report on the area where Trinidad and Tobago has responsibility for, and that is the area of crime and security in the region. And we received the report of the CARICOM impacts, which is the crime and security, the agency which monitors and reports to the heads, and also monitors the development of criminal conduct in the region. Unfortunately, as from meeting to meeting, the report doesn't get any better. We are, throughout the region, all our countries are facing significant upsurge in crime, and there are also, in parallel, issues of regional contributions to the various elements of the regional security system in place. So there was a call for countries to give priority to ensuring that the security arrangements that are in place, for example, the Advanced Passenger Information System, which allows us to monitor who is coming into the region and who is leaving. That system we have to make sure that it's paid for, and other things like that, to make sure that we have some element of control and information on matters of regional security like that. Also, we agreed that there's benefit to be had by cooperation, sharing information between our various agencies, all the way down to, well, from Trinidad and Tobago standpoint, we are interested very much so in the question of cooperation with terms of witness protection and information sharing on persons who may be engaged in nefarious activities in one territory or another. So we remain very concerned. But from meeting to meeting, the whole question of the funding of the regional security agencies is on the agenda as an item of concern. So we have been discussing again from meeting to meeting this question of applying a passenger surcharge of $2 or $3 US, either $2 or $3, and that money be used directly for supporting the budget that is required to fund the necessary security apparatus, as I just mentioned there. Initially, we were waiting for unanimity on that, and it appears as though it's not going to be had after so many meetings. So what we agreed on was that those countries who are so inclined to put that $2 tax on passengers to guarantee a revenue stream for security should go ahead and do it. And those who are not going to do that for their own reasons should ensure that they, from other sources, find the funding to pay for the security systems that we are using. And so Trinidad and Tobago, we'll make sure that we are paid up. And if we'll have some discussions as to whether we should extract that funding in the way that some of the other countries may or may not do. But certainly, our security systems have to be funded. It's unacceptable to have security systems in place and not fund them. As a matter of fact, it was brought to our attention that the funding situation was so delinquent that some of our staff on some of these agencies throughout the region have been working without being paid. Now, that is wholly unacceptable. So we have to rectify that. Another thing that we did was to focus, and we received the report of an assignment that was given to Prime Minister Alan Shastany, who was authorized by CARICOM to travel to Bucharest and to Brussels to take our CARICOM position, largely complaint, and part of our aggressive diplomacy to push back against the arbitrary action of the EU countries who have been arbitrarily blacklisting Caribbean countries and accusing us of being tax havens and sheltering money launderers. We believe that this kind of arbitrary action on the part of the European bodies is either out of absolute ignorance or disregard for our rights, and we have decided to raise our diplomatic response to it across the world to indicate that we are not prepared to accept that kind of treatment, because de-risking us in this arbitrary manner when in fact we are qualified and qualifying in the agencies that have that responsibility to qualify us. For example, Barbados right now is facing a very serious threat in a matter of days. As a matter of fact, I think today, Barbados faced a very serious threat from this designation by external agency. Even though Barbados would have qualified on the OECD arrangements, Trinidad and Tobago, we are complying under the steps of the Global Forum, yet very arbitrarily we are getting these designations. So it is clear to us that our own voice as the Caribbean, as CARICOM, is not being taken very seriously by these agencies who believe that maybe we are takers of whatever they put out and disregard the effects of such designations on us. So what we have been doing in recent last 2 years or so is to partner with bigger countries or more effective voices so that our case can be made at the table where we don't sit. Because in some of these instances, some of these decisions are being taken in fora where we have no presence. And that is quite unfair to us because we are not even allowed to make our case. So we have been teaming up, like Prime Minister Chastany went to Bucharest because Romania is chairing and was hosting that meeting of EU countries at IFIN. And he was able to make our case to Romania, and Romania is now undertaking to assist us in making our case at the fora where we have no seat. And we also, you would have remembered, I had gone to Chile last year, I think it was, and the president of Chile came to CARICOM, and Chile had agreed to help CARICOM raise its voice at these fora so that we would not be disregarded as we have been. And the latest to have joined us in assisting us in this matter is the nation of Estonia. For those of you who are not familiar with the Baltic area, Estonia is a very small European country, which is about the size of Trinidad and Tobago population-wise. They have the same population like us, but they are among the world's leading countries in the use of artificial intelligence and IT in governance. Virtually their entire operation, both in the private and public sector, is digitized, and they use IT across the board, and they lead the world in those things. So as we struggle here with e-government and ease of doing business and so on, we had great words of encouragement from Estonia, whose president spent a couple of days with us in this meeting and has undertaken to provide us with access to their exposure and training, and also access to assistance to help to bring us into the digital age, because they understand that if we do not try to accomplish what they have accomplished as a region and as countries within the region, we will be left behind. So we found a very good friend in Estonia, and as a matter of fact, even as the president of Estonia was there with us and hearing what Barbados was facing today, she got on the phone and tried to call as many people in Europe as possible to indicate to them what the Caribbean countries were facing in a situation not of our own making. So we expect, they've offered us access to their systems, and we will undertake to send some of our bright young people to see what they're doing and to learn, and also to get assistance in building our e-government platforms here in Trinidad and Tobago and throughout the region. We are also working under the guidance of the Prime Minister of Grenada, who has the responsibility for ICT. We are aiming to create a single ICT space in the region, so that instead of having ICT jurisdictions like in the Air Services Agreement, where we, instead of having each country having its own ICT space with all the carryings on of that, where we are in fact being exploited by the external companies because we do not have the wherewithal to ensure that we get the benefit of technology as it is available to a larger space. And small countries have difficulty negotiating best conditions. But if we have one ICT space in the CARICOM region, then we can very quickly come up to speed with respect to the level of technology, the agreements we enter into, and the use of technology in government and in the private sector and at the personal level. So very soon we should be in a position, as we are aiming to do with civil aviation, to have, instead of having a number of civil aviation authorities in each little island, we have one regional civil aviation authority and one ICT space. So we are very close to those things, and that's where we are heading with respect to the improvement of CARICOM as a deliverer of the potential of our region to act in unison for the benefit of all our people. Another major issue that took our attention was the issue of the state of play in Venezuela, as you are expecting. There is a communique that was issued specific to Venezuela, and it should be on the CARICOM website at this point in time. It's very short, but it makes the point that we want to make. And let me draw to your attention where we've been and where we are at the moment. We know for the last 4 years, Venezuela has had some very significant internal difficulties, political, economic, and diplomatic. Venezuela eventually got to a point where it began to experience sanctions from the United States and other countries who may join the United States in that, but they're mainly United States sanctions. Then we got up one morning not too long ago, and we discovered that Venezuela had broken its diplomatic relations with the United States and had given the United States 72 hours to pull its embassy staff out of Caracas. The response from the United States to that development was and continues to be quite belligerent, in that it would not comply with any instructions from the sitting government of Venezuela, because in the meantime a second president had been installed in Venezuela in an arrangement which is in dispute. So Venezuela has two presidents and significant disturbance within the country, leading to violence, deaths, confrontation on the borders. Venezuela and Colombia are virtually at dragon's point, and humanitarian aid is being attempted into Venezuela through Colombia. And the response from the government of Venezuela is to have stopped that. All of these things created a threat to us here in Trinidad and Tobago and to the region. And our initial response to this had been, and continues to be, that this is a matter that is political, and it is for the people of Venezuela to determine their future by having dialogue about political differences within their country. It is not for us in Trinidad and Tobago or for any other to impose upon Venezuela regime change and a political system of others' choice. So we from day one took the position to the Venezuelans and to the rest of the world that CARICOM and Trinidad and Tobago, an integral part of the leadership of CARICOM, that we are backing no horse in that very difficult race, but we hold ourselves out, available to speak to any and all, and to assist any and all in arriving at a place where dialogue and negotiations can provide a lasting peace to the Venezuelan problem. It's not the first time this has happened in any country, and in our region. So we have some experience in how to treat with it, unlike what others are saying to us from outside of the region or with other agendas. So we emphasize that the United Nations Charter and the OAS Charter, understanding that situations like these may temptingly occur, have written in the charters of the UN and the OAS that the use of force, the threat of the use of force, intervention into the sovereign cross borders of countries, interference in the political affairs of countries are not to be countenanced or encouraged, and that is where we're at. We do not adjust these things willy-nilly. We stand on those principles. And even though circumstances might indicate to some people that we should sacrifice those principles for expediency, we in the CARICOM and we as Trinidad and Tobago have taken the position that we will not do that, because the second stage might be worse than the first. As a matter of fact, the existence of those conditions in those treaties is the only guarantee that small countries like ours and Estonia and Barbados and the Maldives, that's the only guarantee we have of any existence going forward in this world that is usually very hostile to small states. I just told you how the EU is just very vai-ki-vai treating with us with respect to our banking and financial management arrangements. You saw what happened to us when we sold bananas. Get up one morning and the banana business is dead. You saw what happened to us with sugar. We had a sugar industry across the region and it was doing something for us. You get up one morning and it was dead because they pulled from us the support that they gave us. We are hearing now. We had a working dinner on Monday night with the Secretary General of UNCTAD. That's the United Nations Commission on Trade and Development. And the head of UNCTAD worked with us on Monday night to bring us up to speed as to what is happening at UNCTAD and the threat that it poses to not just to the world in general, but particularly to small developing economies like the Caribbean economies. And what bothers us from the reports that we were getting is that he was saying to us that what is happening at the WTO now, where the tribunal of the WTO, which is like the court within between the WTO, where complaints can be adjudicated upon, that powerful countries are disregarding the tribunal and are making their own arrangements without reference to any consequences at WTO. And if this continues, all that is going to happen is that we will begin to see the return of the conditions of world trade very much like the GATT. And that will have serious consequences for us as a people in a world where might is right and strength is victory. So we have to be careful what principles we support and what we eschew. So ladies and gentlemen, these CARICOM meetings, they happen frequently, they're very tedious, they're very stressful, but on the table are very weighty issues which need to be addressed by the leadership of the region. To get back to the Venezuelan situation, where are we now? Having taken the position that we are taking, we found ourselves in the same camp with Uruguay and Mexico. And we, at the invitation of the Uruguayans, we went to, as a CARICOM delegation, we went to Montevideo and we took our position in the Montevideo mechanism and said to the world, this is what we think should happen with Venezuela and this is our basket of principles that we stand on. The EU came to Montevideo from a position of ultimatum, because you may recall at the time when the Venezuelans were giving the Americans 72 hours to leave, the EU countries were giving Venezuela 8 days to act and acknowledge this second president or else. And of course, in our meeting in New York, where CARICOM diplomatic team went, Canada was saying to us, the time for talk is over, meaning the threat of force is present and the likelihood of intervention is within a matter of hours. Well, we seem to have moved away from that because the EU, starting in the Uruguayan contact, they named themselves a contact group, they took the position that there should be elections in Venezuela. We are of the view that elections in Venezuela is a matter for the people of Venezuela. And secondly, that there ought to be humanitarian assistance to the people of Venezuela. But that assistance is to come through the United Nations, which is exactly where CARICOM was, that there is a role for the United Nations in the difficulty in Venezuela. As it stands now, very many countries have withdrawn from the bellicosity that we saw in the hours when there was the break in that relations between Venezuela and the United States, and are saying now openly that they do not support military intervention. But of course, they may not be able to stop it, but it is not being advanced as the solution to the problem. Many countries are now saying that the UN, notwithstanding the points of views of some people here in Trinidad and Tobago who ought to have known better, they are all now coming to a point where CARICOM has been and continues to be that we need to get the UN in with respect to the unpoliticized distribution of humanitarian aid in Venezuela. And that being so, then the government of Venezuela, as recognized by the United Nations, ought to comply with the instructions of the UN. I shouldn't say the instructions, with the possibilities of the UN to have humanitarian aid from unpoliticized and unbiased sources to get into the people of Venezuela. That is the thing, that is the first thing that has to be done. And with each passing day, we believe that good sense is prevailing in small doses. At the very beginning, we at CARICOM, or should I say, acting as an integral part of the CARICOM effort, we asked to see the United States Secretary of State. And we had forgotten about that because we didn't get a response at the height of the tension. On Tuesday, we were invited to Washington to meet with the Secretary of State. We consider this to be a step in the right direction, and CARICOM has authorized that the diplomatic team, which has been invited to Washington, should accept the invitation and travel to Washington to have a meeting with Secretary of State Pompeo on Wednesday, which is Ash Wednesday, which means that there goes my carnival. Because I have to travel on Tuesday, and I would meet with Secretary of State with the CARICOM team on Wednesday, and Trinidad and Tobago's efforts in Washington would indicate that I would meet with some other leaders in the United States on Thursday, and I will talk to you again before I leave. I will talk to the media again before I leave. Those of you who are not costumed and having a time. Maybe Sunday. I think I'll probably talk to the media on Sunday. So stand by for that, because there's something else that I might have to tell you on Sunday. But that's what it is. And we're making some progress in very many areas. And we just have to keep, plodding along and keeping our vision in front of us and staying focused on the principles that brought us into being. And I must tell you that the single CARICOM position on this matter, or in any matter, is not an easy thing to arrive at. Because we have 14 countries in the CARICOM. And as a matter of fact, I should also tell you that Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin have applied for associate membership in CARICOM. The Secretariat has been looking at the legal requirements for that to happen. We've pretty much concluded those exercises. We had a report which indicates that they are cleared to come in. So we expect that at the next meeting in St. Lucia in July, you should hear that we have extended the CARICOM to associate members of Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin. And this is a good thing for the region and for the people of the CARICOM as a whole. So I would talk to you on Sunday, and then I leave on Tuesday for this continuation. We are of the view that talking to all parties, including the people associated with the second presidency in Venezuela. We have had contact through our embassy in Washington. So we are in contact with virtually everybody, which is where we want to be in this matter. So if you have any questions, I can take a couple of questions so that you can get back to your carnival fets.
Good night, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Just with regards to the travel arrangements, will people soon be able to get cheaper flights, cheaper intra-Caribbean flights?
Cheaper is not what it's going to be. The problem is that cheap airfares are not likely to be in the Caribbean for quite some time, because at the current levels of airfare, the crisis I mentioned in Liat is that there isn't sufficient revenue to fund the operation. So that is not the kind of environment in which one can expect any significant amount of cheaper fares. What we are hoping is that somewhere along the way, we can attract some kind of competition funded from the private sector, which would expand the availability of air transportation in the region. And until you get to that stage where there's a surfeit of seats available, air travel within the Caribbean will remain where it's at or even get more expensive. We have an airline in the region. We do not see the opportunities to have cheaper fares as your main revenue earning effort. But it's a fact that air travel in the region is expensive and being borne by taxpayers largely.
Last time we had competition, or the last time we tried to have some sort of competition in the market, it got driven out because of highly subsidized state entities.
And what is the result of that? The result of that is the story I just told you, that Liat has enough cash to last for 10 days.
Did they ask Trinidad to help them with bailing out Liat?
Well, I wouldn't want to say that, but our market is the region, and whenever they get into any difficulty, they would look to us, but they're looking to us now with an understanding that we are not in a position to do what we used to do. And we are all in the same boat, that we are suffering significant cash shortage, and generosity is not of the type that there was a time in Trinidad and Tobago when we had surpluses in our budget. We carried some costs in the region. We're not in that position today. What we are aiming to do is whatever responsibility we have, that we discharge that responsibility, which is why I started out talking about the shareholding in Liat. We're not a shareholder, so we escape the cash call. But if Liat collapses, we are going to be affected seriously, because Liat is an engine of the economies of those small islands. So we hope that they can fix it without us, and whatever little we can do, like doing business with Liat, then we do that, because we are all friends in this.
Good evening. Prime Minister, I wouldn't want to ask you anything that might be inappropriate for you to answer, but...
Well, please don't. I'm not good at answering inappropriate questions. Yeah?
Or maybe that's not the right word, but what I want to ask is, I mean, being Prime Minister of us, being so close to Venezuela, being a citizen here, is this causing you personal anxiety? Is the future causing you personal anxiety? We already have a lot of our own problems, and now this has come up.
Well, the state of anxiety is not a good state for a Prime Minister to be in. So I'm not really suffering any anxiety, but I'm concerned with any deterioration of an already difficult situation. We cannot but be negatively affected by a worsening of the situation in Venezuela. It's as simple as that. And anything that would worsen the condition in Trinidad and Tobago is of concern to me as Prime Minister and to all of us as citizens of this country.
To get back to Venezuela, we are maintaining our stance of dialogue, but do you think that advocating for elections, for example, constitutes political interference?
Well, there are people who are advocating for elections. There are people who are prescribing certain solutions. We are not prescribing solutions. We are simply asking that the people who have found themselves at Dragon's Point, what we at the CARICOM call destruction, they're combining to destroy, that if they disengage from that approach and look to another possibility, we believe that there's another possibility. And as I said before, this is not an unusual development. And the calls to and for Venezuela is for them to take responsibility, some responsibility, aided by externals in some way, to come to a point where they can face their situation, which is political, economic, and of course, relieve themselves of external pressures so as to build the future they want for their people.
Do you think, now CARICOM is advocating for UN intervention in terms of distributing aid. Do you think the current system now is political?
Very much so. It's a political standoff in Venezuela. You have two presidents. It's a political standoff. The reason why we are talking about the UN is because any other intervention into that intractable position without the UN sanction is likely to be illegal, lopsided, and dangerous.
And given Trinidad and Tobago and I guess CARICOM's position as probably Venezuela's most cordial neighbor right now, is a stronger role in coming to a resolution part of your agenda when you meet with Mr. Pompeo?
No, Trinidad and Tobago's position is intertwined with the CARICOM position, and that's whether it's Jamaica, Barbados, Grenada. We don't have a separate position. What we do have is a closeness, and we make no apologies, Trinidad and Tobago, for being on good terms with our neighbors, of which Venezuela is our closest neighbor. Venezuela is closer to Trinidad than is Scarborough, and we understand what that means. So we are not going to be encouraged onto anybody's bandwagon to our own detriment. And therefore, if there is to be any kind of intervention into the business of Venezuela, it ought to be through an agency which the world's countries have put in place for such circumstance. It is those who are preparing to disregard that that is putting us at risk.
And has CARICOM had any further contact with either Mr. Maduro, or I don't even think we've actually contacted Mr. Guaido, but have we had any contact with either of them?
The CARICOM Secretariat, which is the public service body that speaks and does that work for the political heads, has been in constant communication with all parties at different levels. Mexico, Uruguay, the CARICOM heads, the Guaido people, and now we're going to meet with the United States at the level of Secretary of State. The CARICOM Secretariat is involved in that at all times, and in fact, is usually the first to indicate to the heads what the, if you may say, what the ground is saying, and where the wind is blowing. The CARICOM Secretariat has professional expertise that does that, and of course, those of us at the political level, we have the people that we can talk to, and we all keep talking. It is when you stop talking that you have a switch that can be turned off for darkness or turned on for light. We met with Canada in New York, and we were very disturbed when Canada told us that their position on Venezuela was time for talk done. We took that to mean that this was a decision that it was time for intervention. And that was our position at CARICOM, and thankfully it has not happened. But this is where we were. Now there are many more people who are not saying that. And this situation has alternatives, and we are rooting for the alternatives. Any other question? If not, thank you all very much, and I wish you all a safe. There's one thing, if you may permit me, I want to make a comment on something I saw in the newspapers. On the way here, I had the opportunity to read the newspapers, and I saw where 2 citizens went into a school and allegedly beat up a principal over the actions of the principal in dealing with a student. I consider this to be probably one of the worst criminal actions to have taken place here in recent times because of the far-reaching consequences of that stupidity. And every parent should pay attention to this, because if this kind of development is going to happen in our country, it means that our teachers are now going to have to be careful how they enforce the regulations and the laws in the school to maintain law and order so that the school remains a place of learning, and how you treat with students. If this is the outcome, I could see where teachers, out of fear of retaliation from parents or friends or whoever they are, that teachers would not be what they are supposed to be in the school place. And therefore, I trust that this would be the last time we see any such thing, and it is to be condemned by every voice in this country. Every parent, every organization should condemn this in its fullest, because it has the potential to further destroy an already tottering school system, which is already of serious concern to us as not delivering, given what we are putting into it. And for this to happen, I trust that it is not going to be accepted as a matter of course and a way of doing business. And I trust that the long arm of the law will reach out and grab those who have done this, and examples be so made of them that no third person will contemplate that action. Thank you all very much.